Okay, welcome back. So following on from the last video, we're using mudpuddles_end, which is attached to this video, and also in the last lecture. Now, if you've been working along, you maybe have your own texture that you want to continue working on, or you can use this file instead and work along with me. So we have our nodes pretty much set up for most of it. We have essentially our water level settings here. We have these three mix nodes, each of them taking this less than node and this value to determine how we are masking off our water color, our water roughness, and our water height. And they seem all to be working quite well. At the moment, our mud doesn't look super great. So let's take this value to about 0.2 or so. And let's work a little bit on our color and our roughness. So at the moment, all our mud is this same color, this dark brown color. Now, generally mud, if we have some high levels on it, those areas tend to dry out faster and they get a little bit lighter. So we're going to grab another mix node. We can just duplicate this one across. And what we're going to do is we are going to essentially use color ramp to determine where we want these two colors to be. So we can just use the same height that we have already picked, which is this one here. And let's look at our result. So you can see our high areas are lighter and our lower areas are darker. Now, if we plug this into this factor and look at the result, you can see what we have. We have our high areas are light, our low areas are dark, and that's exactly what we want. So we'll plug this result into this color slot and look at our result. And now you can see that our higher areas are just slightly lighter than our lower areas. We also want to do the same thing with our roughness. So we're going to grab this same color ramp node and plug it in here. So you can see again, our higher areas are less glossy than our lower areas. But we still have a few little issues in here. Our mud just looks very clumpy. It's not got a massive amount of detail in it. And some of these little peaks and things I'm not super happy with. We are going to use a converter float curve node. So this is not something that we've done a lot of. I'm going to grab this result and plug it into our value. Plug this result into our value as well. You can see nothing is changing. I want to go into a side view for this. So if I go into a side view, I can kind of see where all my peaks and my valleys are. So at the moment, we can pretty much assume that around about this height is around about 1. And this height here is around about 0, but it might not be quite as clear as that. So what we want to think about is we want to think about this float curve node as determining the values, the linear values. So let's say we have a value of 0 here. This relates to this value here. If we take this value up, you can see it will raise all those values that were at 0 up a little bit. Gets to the point where all our values are pretty close to 1 if we just fill up that whole curve. We want to keep our low values like that. And you can see our high values, if we move this down, our higher values come down, but our low values stay in the same position. Now, what we don't want to do is we don't want to just pull this down because it's affecting all our values. What we want to do is kind of pick values from around about this point upwards and then just smooth them off a little bit. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to add in a new point on our map. I'm going to make this Bezier point, or an auto handle point in this case. I'm going to grab this and just move this down. So as I do that, what you can see is we're really not affecting as much of this as we are affecting really just these values here. And that just smooths off some of the tops of the highest little points in here. That starts to fix our issues. Now, obviously we still have quite a few kind of jaggy points a little bit further down. We can fix that a little bit by just adding in a little bit more control. Let's take this value here and let's make that more linear, and maybe just making that a bit more extreme. Okay, and I think that's a little bit nicer. Now, the next thing that we might want to do is we might want to just add a lot more detail to this mud. So at the moment, our displacement is quite nice. It's not too bad. But what we could do is we could add in an additional normal map at this point. So let's grab noise texture node. We're going to grab a couple of these. We'll grab our object output, and I know that was kind of hard to see. It was so zoomed out. But I'm just grabbing the object, plugging it into the vector. Let's look at our result here. Now we want something quite high scale. Let's try something like 25. Let's get a lot of detail, a lot of roughness. Let's try 8 and 0.8. Now I'm not sure why, but I always find that if I have a detail that's 10 times the roughness, I seem to get a nice effect. I'm not sure if that's a thing or if it's just a coincidence. It seems to work quite well. I'm going to grab this bump node. Let's look at our result. We'll plug our factor into our height, and we'll plug our normal into our normal. Okay, and immediately you can see we are getting much more detail on our mud now that we have a noise texture on it as well. So you can see our mud is really quite rough. We probably don't want quite as much strength in there. Let's try about 0.5. Just reduce that a little bit. And that looks a bit nicer. Okay, so our mud is looking a little bit nicer there. Maybe the scale is a little bit too high. Let's try 15. That's still too high. I think a lot of that is actually coming from the detail and the roughness. Let's try about 7. And let's increase the distortion a little bit. Adding in a little bit of distortion can give us some more kind of interesting patterns here. Again, we don't want to use 3D, we want to use 2D. So we'll see how that affects things. Maybe increase that detail a little bit more. Maybe take that distortion down to about 0.1. Okay, and that looks not too bad. Now, one issue that we do have here is our water now also has that normal map, but that's fine. We know exactly how to fix that. We just duplicate this mix texture, plug this in here, and then plug this threshold in here. We need to also use our less than as a mask. Okay, and that's fixed that. So there we go. We have our normal map working a little bit nicer. I do still think the strength is a little bit too high. Let's try 0.25. Okay, and that's a little bit nicer. Okay, so in general, I'm pretty happy with that mud. We have our displacement, we have our bump, we have our roughness, we have our color. We could maybe stand to just adjust this roughness and this color a little bit just by tweaking some of these values. Let's have a look at our color and see exactly what's happening here. Okay, let's see if that's given us a nice effect. A bit more contrast in our map. Yeah, and we do have some rougher areas along the top. Okay, so at this point our mud is looking really nice. In the next video we're going to add even more detail to this mud, do a couple of finishing touches to prepare us for creating a final node group. Okay, so it's challenge time. Just a quick challenge for this video. Just tidy up the node tree by using frames, colours and labels. I also want to stress that keeping your node tree as tidy and organised as possible really helps in the later stages of shader creation where dozens or hundreds of nodes can really make things confusing. So pause the video and have a go at that, and join me in a few moments and I'll show you how I'll arrange this node tree. Okay, so I hope you had fun doing that challenge. So I'll show you how I would arrange this. So I'm just going to move this off to the side. Now, we have a lot of nodes relating to displacement here. Quite a few, in fact. So I'm just going to move these a little bit further down. We have our nodes relating to our bump. We have 3 of them. So we'll grab that, put that there, and just put those in a frame. we'll grab this displacement and this mix node. We'll put these in a frame as well. Now, generally, I would have bumps and displacements in the same color frames. So let's just do that now. And we'll just make sure that one is called bump. And although I'm calling it bump, it is a normal map. We are not using bump mapping, which is a different process than normal mapping. So we have our nodes that deal with our color. We essentially have two nodes that deal with our color at the moment. Frame those up. And I like to add this yellow color. Okay, so in the next video, we are going to add some finishing touches to this material, and then we'll be able to turn it into a completely customizable node group. I'll see you then.